This video is now in session, and Trump is attempting to do the same thing he did in the 2020 election with the 2021 Virginia gubernatorial election, which was sow doubt and fraud claims into the election. So Trump has already stated that the Virginia election will have some irregularities and that an election fraud will most likely happen because the Democrats control all three parts of the Virginia state government. So he specifically said that you have a close race in Virginia, but it's not close if they cheat. So they're essentially saying that, so Trump is essentially saying that unless the Democrats win by a very narrow margin, or I guess if the Democrats win, then at this point, they're most likely to cheat in that election. Which, it's a bunch of baloney, and it's a bunch of BS, but it's really there to fan out the base in Virginia. It's there to fan out the Republican base and to energize Republicans into saying that they should have won the election. And essentially, Trump wants to overturn the Virginia election if it goes Democratic, just like he wanted to in the 2020 election. But a lot of this, again, is just simple political BS, but it has repercussions. We saw in the 2020 election what happened because of election fraud claims. We saw violence spew out into institutions, including the U.S. Capitol, and we saw repercussions to our democratic systems. And now Trump is trying to do the same thing without any kind of conscience towards democracy in Virginia, and as well as in California, where Gavin Newsom is currently facing a recall election. There are people who have already said that if the Democrats win in California in the recall election, then it's rigged. Even though that is the definition of being a snowflake. The very same people criticized Hillary Clinton supporters for saying that Russia hacked the 2016 election, but then they're doing the same thing here in the 2020 election. And obviously there will always be people who say the election was not that an election that didn't go for their preferred candidate is not fair. That has forever happened in the 2000 election, 1996, 1992, 1988, 1984, 1980. There have always been people who have said that that a certain election is not fair. But we're seeing this kind of sentiment grow across both the Republican and mainly Republican, but also Democratic base in recent months, and that is that's really bad for us, for our system, when you have people who are not willing to accept the results of an election, whether it's fair or not. Because when we have that kind of sentiment, then we're more likely to not accept the person who gets to hold that position of power. We usually don't accept them, and then we try to find every way to go against them, and that is not conducive for a strong government. It's not conducive for a government that can actually produce progress. So for the Virginia gubernatorial election, if Terry McAuliffe wins, and if then Virginia Republicans are most likely going to cry wolf, and then they're most likely going to find ways to say, we don't want to work with you, and we're going to do everything to destroy you because we don't even accept you as our governor. So that kind of rhetoric creates instability and inaction in government. And ultimately, it's all for what? A position of power. But ultimately, even though it's a position of power, our system is designed so that any one person does not gain so much power to the point where they can destroy an institution. They can try to destroy an institution, but usually it doesn't work. So if you think that Joe Biden, for example, did not win the 2020 election and was wrongfully installed into the presidency, then just note that even though you might not like his policies, he's not going to be able to destroy the country based on what you think. For Hillary Clinton supporters, I mean, even though Donald Trump was an unorthodox president, he ultimately did not destroy permanently destroy institutions. He did not cause mass damage, and Joe Biden can't do that either, because ultimately this system does not allow for those things to happen. Again, presidents and governors can try to commit treason, but ultimately it's not going to work in their favor, because we've seen that those kinds of things are likely to be they are the line that people are not willing to cross, that the majority of Americans and that the majority of politicians are not willing to cross. So for Donald Trump, he's going to try to do this mainly because he's found that it energizes his base, and it also gives him a lot of money, which is useful for the debt that he owes for a lot of people. But it has mass consequences, not only nationally speaking, but globally speaking. We're seeing this kind of thing happen around the world. In Peru, there was recently an election between a far right and a far leftist, and ultimately the far left won that presidential election in Peru. But then the far right candidate, Keiko Fujimori, attempted to overturn the election, saying that there was fraudulent ballots in the results. And ultimately, even though the far left individual, who was a farmer, or not a farmer, an educator, ultimately, even though he won, there is still a lot of there is still a lot of chaos going on in Peru right now. And this is most likely going to happen around the world. And in the United States, we're still seeing claims about the 2020 election being rigged. In Florida, there are Republicans who think that Florida's 5 most populous counties, including Broward County and as well as Miami-Dade County, have irregularities in their results. And ultimately, this is not good for this is not going to help them. This is not going to help Republicans who are trying to subvert the election, and it didn't help the Democrats who attempted to use the Mueller investigation for their political benefit. Ultimately, most Americans, the majority of Americans will not care if an election is stolen or not. And what they care more about, this is the more important part, what they care about the most is not if an election is stolen or not, but if the person who becomes governor or president or representative or senator ultimately does the bidding that they want them to do, if they ultimately help with their daily lives. And that is something that Republicans have not gotten, especially Trump and Republicans who are trying to pursue investigations related to the 2020 election. Like, it might help energize their political base, but when it comes to election time, what really matters is if someone is able to help their constituents. If that is not satisfied, then they are not going to win that election. So if you're a Republican focusing on an election that happened a year ago, then and if, or I guess 2 years ago, come 2022, then you're not going to win, because for a lot of people that doesn't matter. It's like January 6th. Even though it was a tragic event, a lot of people simply don't care. That's the brutal truth when it comes to politics. People truly care about themselves. They are ignorant towards themselves, towards what is in it for them. Why should they vote for a certain candidate, and how will they help them? Not how they will help other people, or how they will help democracy, or investigate election fraud, but rather how will they help themselves? How will they help their constituents on an everyday basis? So if the Republican Party does not get that, if they do not assimilate that in time for the 2022 election, then they are going to have a lot of missed opportunities. Because if they keep focusing on the 2020 election in 2022 and 2024, then people are going to question why their legitimacy as a political party that's meant to implement policies that are beneficial for them, rather than just being a pundit talking about how an election was rigged or how there were irregularities, because those things don't matter for most of the American public. It doesn't. And if it does matter to you, then ultimately you have ultimately you will have a future election where you can pursue, where you can work to win in that election. If you're a Republican that does not believe the 2020 elections were factual, ultimately you have 2 years now, I guess 1 year, to win in 2022. Elections have consequences, but elections are not permanent. They are not the end-all be-all of the political scene. You have future elections in 2022 and 2024, and even though 4 years may seem like a lifetime in politics, 4 years can come by faster than you think, and you will have chances to go to campaign and to vote for the party that you want to win in an election. And that's the important part, which is that even though you might think that an election was rigged, you have about a year or 2 years to vote and prepare for the next election. So that's the end of this video. Hope you enjoyed it. This video is now adjourned, and I'll see you in the next one.